The 1944 cold weather layering trick outsmarted winter, and you know it still beats modern gear. The cold didn't just threaten soldiers in 1944, it stalked them. It crept through uniforms, froze weapons in their hands, and turned an already brutal front line into a fight for basic survival. And here's the part most people never hear about. A small, clever, layering trick quietly kept thousands of men warm enough to function, march, and stay alive. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't high-tech, but it worked so well that modern outdoor experts still rely on it today, often without realizing where it came from. This simple tactic emerged during one of the harshest winters of World War II, a season so cold that medics recorded cases of frostbite even inside tents and dugouts. Supplies were stretched thin, fuel was scarce, and troops stuck in the freezing forests of Europe had to improvise fast. What they discovered is a strategy that looks obvious today, but at the time was a breakthrough born from pure necessity. And once you understand how it worked and why it still applies to the modern world, you'll never look at winter clothing the same way again. As winter choked the front lines, the US Army faced a brutal reality. Standard uniforms were not built for long static exposure to sub-zero temperatures. The famous M1943 field jacket was tough and versatile, but it wasn't enough on its own. Soldiers needed a way to convert ordinary gear into a reliable thermal system without waiting for resupply or fancy equipment. So they turned to a method many veterans simply called the inner core trick. Instead of piling on heavy outer layers, troops focused on building one warm, dry, well-insulated core close to the skin. The insight behind it was surprisingly modern. Heat loss doesn't start on the outside, it starts at the core. And once the core cools, the rest of the body spirals down fast. To stop this, soldiers began stacking thin but strategic layers of wool closer to their torso while keeping the outer layer breathable and wind-resistant. The system worked like a heat trap. Lightweight wool captured warm air. Cotton undershirts managed sweat. The M1943 shell blocked the bite of the wind. The result wasn't bulky, and it allowed full mobility, something heavy coats failed to deliver. Here's where things get clever. Soldiers figured out that warmth wasn't about wearing the thickest jacket. It was about controlling airflow. Warm air is a resource. Your body generates it constantly. The trick is holding on to it long enough to stay comfortable while avoiding moisture build-up that leads to chills. That's what the 1944 layering method excelled at. Thin wool close to the skin kept moisture away while providing insulation even when slightly damp. A mid-layer of heavier wool or flannel added loft. The outer shell created a barrier against wind without suffocating the system. When done right, this setup allowed soldiers to hike, dig, fight, and sleep without their clothing turning into a swamp of sweat and ice. Modern survival instructors still preach this exact structure. They teach hikers, mountaineers, and Arctic researchers that, well, warmth is just trapped air. The more you capture, the less your body has to work. And, you know, the soldiers of 1944 figured that out by trial, error, and a whole lot of frozen nights. What made this method extraordinary wasn't just the materials, it was the order. Soldiers learned that the sequence of layers mattered more than the layers themselves. Swap one element and honestly the whole system collapsed. Wool on the outside meant losing heat to wind. Too much cotton meant getting soaked with sweat. Heavy coats worn too early meant overheating and, well, freezing later when the body lost moisture. By refining the order, light cotton undershirt, thin wool sweater, thicker wool layer, loose outer shell, they created a mini-climate around the body. The tactic took advantage of every natural property each fabric had to offer. Cotton breathed, wool insulated, the shell shielded. Together they formed one of the most effective low-tech thermal systems ever used in harsh weather. And unlike those bulky coats, the system was modular. Soldiers could, peel layers off or add them back quickly without compromising warmth. That flexibility is really why the trick didn't just keep them alive. It kept them efficient. Here's the interesting part. If you walk into any modern outdoor store and buy a layering system, you're actually buying a version of this 1944 solution. Brands may call it base layer, mid layer, or outer shell, but honestly, the structure is identical. What's changed is the fabric technology, not the core principle. And yet, despite all the fancy materials we have now, synthetics, microfleece, thermal membranes, this old-school trick still holds up surprisingly well. Try it with basic wool and a simple windbreaker, and you'll feel the warmth immediately. It's a method that survives because it's built on physics, not fashion. For survivalists, hikers, or really anyone working outdoors in cold weather, it remains one of the most practical systems you can use. It's cheap, flexible, and, well, remarkably effective even in freezing, wet, or unpredictable environments. That's why this layering trick isn't just a relic of World War II. It's a living skill. Troops didn't stop at layering. They adapted the system depending on what the mission demanded. In freezing static positions, they added another thin inner layer to extend heat retention. During long marches, they removed the heavier mid-layer to avoid sweating and layered back up when resting. This constant adaptation kept the system balanced between heat and moisture. They also discovered that keeping the neck warm was one of the biggest heat savers. A simple wool scarf or even a wrapped field towel dramatically improved warmth. The reason is simple. The neck is a major escape route for heat. Close it off and the whole core stays energized. Another adjustment was loosening the outer shell. Tight jackets squeeze the air pockets that make insulation work. So soldiers wore their M1943 shells slightly large, allowing the system to breathe and trap air efficiently. It was a small tweak with a big payoff. Heavy winter jackets feel warm when you first put them on, but they fail when used for long activity. They trap sweat, reduce mobility, and create a dangerous cycle of overheating, followed by rapid cooling. The 1944 system avoids that entirely. By breaking warmth into layers, it lets you fine-tune your temperature with almost zero effort. This is why experienced outdoorsmen say layers are heat control, not just insulation. That mentality comes straight from wartime necessity. Soldiers couldn't rely on bulky gear. They needed a method that worked in forests, trenches, towns and foxholes, and they needed something any soldier could build, even with limited supplies. Cold weather doesn't care if you're a soldier in 1944 or a traveller stuck on a broken-down car in modern winter. The body reacts the same way. Heat escapes, moisture builds, the risk rises. Understanding this old technique gives you control over your own warmth, using whatever clothing you already have. Whether you're outdoors for work, camping, or simply caught in a sudden temperature drop, this method gives you a proven blueprint. No gimmicks, no expensive gear, just physics and smart layering. This technique survived because it worked. It kept soldiers alive in one of the coldest winters in modern military history, and it still stands as one of the smartest ways to stay warm today. It's a reminder that survival isn't always about the newest tools. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones forged in the toughest conditions by people who had no choice but to innovate. If you enjoy uncovering forgotten skills like this, make sure you subscribe to Legacy of Survival. Hit the like button, share the video with someone who loves history or the outdoors, and stay tuned. There are many more hidden techniques from the past that prove humans have always been resourceful, even against the coldest odds.